Hello, welcome back. You are tuning in to Magnetic ID with Chris Madrigal. This is where your influence is detected and your identity is defined. This is a space where misalignment ends and your magnetism begins. And today we are going to talk about how to be multifaceted and shine, right? And I want to talk about what it actually takes to live in alignment and let that multifaceted brilliance shine and come through. And it really starts from a part of us that is quite often overlooked. And this is not about doing more or doing to prove something, right? This is simply about recognizing who you already are and the gifts that you've had all along, right? So there's three things that I'm going to talk about, right? And that's recognizing your gifts, deciding that you're going to share those gifts with the world, and then own it, regardless of what anybody says. And I want to start off by just the part of recognizing and acknowledging your gifts, right? Because most of the time, you can't recognize the gifts that you had because they come so natural to you. And this is where I say it's so important to be yourself, to own it. To recognize those gifts means to go within and to really identify everything that makes you who you are. And sometimes because they are so natural to you, it just seems so normal that you overlook the fact that they are actually your true gifts. You don't know how to recognize them, right? But the moment that you own it and recognize it, it allows you to help others, right? Once you're able to point out, once you're able to recognize what those gifts really are, then you're able to just have them shine within you. And if you simply don't know how to recognize them, then allow me to support you there, right? Because once I can point them out to you, you're going to see them clearly because everyone has a unique set of gifts. Some that you can recognize and others that you can't, but other people will, right? So I want to share with you just a little bit of what that can look like. Because when I began to share my gifts, that's when I was able to expand, right? And when you're able to share your gifts, you become multifaceted, right? One of the areas that I know for myself to be in that multifaceted space is the ability to support and help others and guide them, right? Being able to, in this case, even share with you and show and highlight what your gifts are. But the other part of me was storytelling and how that is embedded in my DNA. I actually never considered myself to be a writer. But now I recognize that by owning it, it is actually part of my DNA. It's why I've always been able to convey messages so clearly. When I was in corporate, that is something that I always got great feedback on, right? Where my messages were very clear. It's why I was able to write excellent, legal reports to, sending those softer messages and adjust them to my audience. But I never recognized them because it's just something that came very natural to me. Now, when I began to acknowledge those gifts, that communication piece of it, it allowed me to just expand and then share them further, right? And when I did that, a whole other world opened up in the publishing space. But even before then, I was already sharing my stories as a gift, right? I shared my stories as a guest blog writer at the Lucille Packard Children's Hospital, which is ranked the #3 children's hospital in California and one of the top 10s nationwide. And I did that just so openly and genuinely. But then I noticed that allowed people to connect with me, right? That then led for me to share my stories in multiple platforms, also in collaboration with the UC Davis Mind Institute, which, Forbes ranked as the #1 healthcare system in California. To me, that was all irrelevant. All I wanted to do was to share my story. And in those platforms, it was more of personal stories, but these are the personal stories that connect, right? By me sharing this, it then allowed me to continue that and lean into that part that has always been embedded in my DNA, right? Sharing my story then resulted in multiple news media features, right? Being featured in CNN Health, museum campaigns, right? Where our story was in multiple museums across the nation. It allowed for me to be featured on the front cover of newspapers multiple times. And again, all of that to me was just simply sharing what I loved. And in those specific cases, it was sharing stories of parenthood, of living a life where I'm advocating for my children. But the main thing there is that I had to recognize that gift that I had to share stories. And that's just one example, right? One example of when I recognized my ability to share stories and how those stories connected with the world just led to another connection, to another feature, to another story, to another person that was touched by that story. People reaching out, right? Because it all starts with connection. But it starts by you owning the fact that you're multifaceted. I was never owning it because I was working in the corporate space. I was in corporate, I was in human resources. And how would I see storytelling and sharing my stories as part of who I was? At that point, I had an identity which was tied to my corporate role. But this is what I'm telling you. When you're able to recognize your gifts, and then number 2, decide that you're going to share those gifts with the world, that's when things begin to change for you. And when you decide to share your gifts with the world, whatever those gifts are, and like I said, if you have a hard time identifying what that is, then allow me to help you, because I have the ability. One of the other gifts that I have is being able to identify things that others are not able to identify within themselves. It is something that I'm naturally good at, which is what made me good in my role in human resources when I was in corporate, because I was able to identify things that were blind spots for others. So when it comes to you owning your gifts, being multifaceted is just allowing yourself to go within and honor the things that you love most. But sometimes they're not out there in the surface for you. Now, we were all born with these beautiful gifts. Some you recognize and some you don't. And those that you don't recognize, other people see them in you. And now it's just a matter of you seeing them within yourself. Once you recognize them, then decide, like I said, that you're going to share them with the world. That's what I did. And that is a part that can feel scary to you. It's a part that feels scary to many. And this is when doubt creeps in, right? This is when your ego will try to keep you safe and tell you that you're not good enough. But this is where I can support you as well in silencing those voices and knowing that the voice that you have within, the one that's meant to guide you and lead you, is the one that you want to tune into. Remember, your ego is there to keep you safe. When you start to expand, when you decide you're going to do something different, that's when doubt creeps in, right? That's when all the negative voices start to come in to tell you why you shouldn't do it or why it isn't going to work. But it's about silencing those voices. Decide to share those gifts even when it feels scary, right? And let me be super clear. Sharing your gifts doesn't mean that you have to change careers, that you have to change what you're doing in life. It just means that you are going to be fueling your life with something that is passion to you, right? And when you're able to give yourself doses, if you will, of the things that you're passionate about, you start to live more in alignment with yourself because you start to remember who you truly are deep inside. After I acknowledged that storytelling was truly embedded in my DNA, that's when I took that next step into the unknown. All these things that I shared with you about being featured in the media, being, guest blog writers for top hospitals, all of that, I did it from a space of just advocating for the things that I loved, right? That's one of my passions, advocating for my children, advocating for children with invisible disabilities. And so I was doing all that from a place of love and passion, not from acknowledging that storytelling was actually embedded in my DNA. Now, when I actually acknowledged it and took that next step for me was to publish, to become an author, right? And so I then shared that same story that I had within me of losing my identity in motherhood because I spent so much time advocating for my children who have invisible disabilities, complex medical conditions, while, I had another son. So I had 3 children under the age of 2, my son and identical twin girls, and they're the ones that had these medically complex issues early on in life. All the stories that I shared were from that space. Being in corporate, living essentially in survival mode, and what that did to me as an individual. All my stories were shared on that. But when I actually decided to own my gifts, I decided to then share that story in my first book. And then that just continued to expand and open doors. I became an international best-selling author. That opportunity then allowed me to lead a collaboration book, which I had no idea it was something that I was going to do. It wasn't even a vision that I had until I allowed myself to experience it. Then I took a group of women to share their stories in a collaboration book, leading them to becoming international best-selling authors, right? That then led me to become a 3-time best-selling author in just 11 months with 2 international bestsellers. And that's not it, right? That experience there led me to a beautiful collaboration now with 𝗦𝗵𝗶, right? Where I get to help many women become authors themselves. But that only started because I decided to own my gifts, because I decided that storytelling is a part of who I am. It is embedded in my DNA, but it's something that I didn't recognize before. So again, it starts in recognizing your gifts and then deciding that you're going to take that next step and share them with the world in whatever that space may be, right? Depending on what your gifts are. And then it's owning it. Owning it regardless of what anyone says. Doing the things, being of service to others, regardless of what anyone tells you, right? Because when you decide to take that further, to recognize it, to take it further, to share it with the world, there's going to be a lot of people that are going to tell you that's not a good idea. You're going to hear that little voice inside that's going to tell you it's not a good idea to share your gifts. But when you do, when you push past that noise, this is where you get to live in alignment with who you really are. This is when your identity begins to come out, right? When you begin to remember who you really are deep inside. When you start to honor every version of you, every piece of you that you've silenced, right? And this is when either you take it to that next level and begin to design your life, or you decide to just silence everything and stay exactly where you are because fear got in the way. Or you decided to listen to all the other voices that were not your own. And you begin to live by default. Live in that space that feels so misaligned, a space that feels like you desire more, but you're not going for it. And that's a time when you recognize that, things are off. Things don't feel good. Now, one of the things for me, for example, is, in business, people will tell you that you have to stick to one thing, right? Just stick to one thing or you'll confuse your audience. Don't speak about multiple things. Just speak about the one thing that you do. And this is where I had to say no. I am a multifaceted person with different talents and gifts to share with the world, right? And I have to honor my gifts, or the only person that I will confuse and disappoint is myself. And I won't be able to shine. And this is what I'm telling you. Recognize your gifts. And if you can't recognize them, then allow me to support you in that. I will show them to you very clearly, right? Then you need to decide what it is that that you want to share, right? Or not so much what you want to share. Decide that you want to bring these gifts to the world. Everything is one decision away. And then you're going to own it. And you're going to take one step at a time, right? Don't dim your own light, right? Your light will actually become brighter and more expansive when you honor and remember who you are. And that in itself is going to magnetize. That light that you shine on yourself is going to allow others to see you, and it's going to bring people to you. But here's the thing. If you're trying to figure out how, then you're asking yourself the wrong question and you're going to continue to be in a loop. You do not want to be asking yourself how you're going to do this over and over again, right? That's going to reveal itself in its way. The key here is about you being and owning those talents, embodying who you already are, which is that person deep inside that is screaming to be recognized, but can't because there's so much clutter inside, right? We want to remove the clutter. We want to get so quiet that you're recognizing those gifts that you have. And this is why I love what I do. This is where I get to embrace alignment and storytelling, right? And I want you to be so aligned with what you desire. And that comes with you beginning to share your story, right? That comes where you just shine from within. And like I said, my desire is for you to be so aligned with what you envision, where you are living that life that you so much envision. And that comes out when you begin to tell me your story, right? And I'd love for you to do that. This is where I get to guide and support you. And honestly, this is why I created the private realignment. The private realignment is actually for women who have mastered performance, who have mastered achievement, and who can basically get results on their sleep, and who are now ready to begin to be present with themselves, refining where she's off just even by one notch, and acknowledging her gifts in life, right? Because being completely aligned with yourself is what is going to make you shine, right? And not just necessarily shine externally, shine within, right? This is where you're going to embrace that multifaceted version of you, where you can have your role in business, in corporate, but you can also have that piece of you that you love that shines, right? So this is really why I created the private realignment, so that I can guide you back to yourself. It is 6 weeks, 3 private spots available only. And over those 6 weeks, we're going to work together to recalibrate your life and leadership from inside out. And this is self-leadership, right? This is where we identify the energetic misalignment, refine your desires, and build a life that supports your next evolution, right? This offer expires on May 30th, and the link is below with all the details. For now, I want you to remember that this is your time to recognize your gifts, your time to decide that you're going to share them with the world, and your time to own it by living and building the life that supports your next evolution. All right, let me know if any of this resonated with you. Connect with me. I'd love to hear from you. And until then, remember, be multifaceted and shine. I'll see you next time.